Let's talk about the possibility of putting a UConn campus in New Haven. And, oh, by the way, you're still on Metro North. You have access to New York. You don't have to move anybody out. Now, they may have still said, take a hike. But if we don't come in and have that conversation, then you're not going to have it. That's what I mean by being the chief marketing officer for the state of Connecticut.
Mr. Stefanowski?
Yeah, so I could spend my whole 15 minutes on this one, but let me start with GE. I'm not sure who Ned met with, but you know why GE left? Because of the worst economic policy over the last 8 years under Dan Malloy. We need to get the corporate tax rate down to keep companies like GE here. You know why GE left? Because of horrible regulatory pressures on the business. You know why GE left? Because when Dan Malloy came out for the final meeting with GE to try to convince them to stay, he started the PowerPoint presentation with a picture of a jet engine. And unfortunately, it was a Pratt & Whitney jet engine, not a GE jet engine. You know why GE left? Because they didn't have a business person leading this state. Look at what Charlie Baker has been able to do in Massachusetts. We need a business person to run this state, not another politician. Let me touch on emphasis for a minute. Mr. Lamont loves to brag about emphasis, how he brought it to Hartford. I'm not sure if you saw the New York Times article this week, Mr. Lamont. Emphasis made $2 billion last year. And he asked the taxpayers of Connecticut to pay $14 million to incent them to come to Connecticut. Emphasis was slapped with the largest fine in the entire country for bringing people in illegally on H-1B visas, putting people in Connecticut out of work. The people are training people from overseas to come in. They're taking over their jobs, and we're putting Connecticut people out of work. Finally, on tolls. I've got one guy on the left that wants to toll people that carpool in the HOV lanes. That's the idea. Let's toll people who actually carpool. I got a guy in the middle that just wants to put tolls on out-of-state tractor trailers. Do you really believe, if we go through all the trouble to get tolls approved and put up the technology, that every worker in Connecticut is not going to be going through 2 or 3 tolls on their way to work? And by the way, that same philosophy is being litigated in Rhode Island right now because it's against interstate commerce. No tolls, lower taxes, skilled workforce, a business person running the state. That's what we need to do to keep companies like GE in Connecticut.
Would you be totally against offering a tax incentive to a company that was considering leaving the state of Connecticut as an incentive to stay? Is that something you'd consider?
We have to start playing offense, Keith. The problem with our governor is he waits for somebody to decide to leave, and then he tries to bribe them to stay. We need to lower our corporate tax rate. We need to reduce regulation. We need to get our infrastructure going. We need to work with the community colleges and the trade schools to get the skill sets that people need.
But you can't do that overnight.
Well, we can start very quickly, and we can reduce that corporate tax rate, and we can give companies and businesses a way to be here. We can get growth going again in this state, but it's not by putting yet another tax, yet another toll on corporations and people in our state. We've proven it doesn't work over the last 8 years. These guys are more of the same. I'm going to change it.
Oz Griebel, I think you're next. I know you want to jump in, but Oz, you're next in line. Would you like to?
I answered the question.
Yeah, okay. Ned Lamont, did you want to respond?
You did. I asked a follow-up about would you be willing?
If the question's in the first 5, no, I'm not in favor generally. The first 5, I think tax dollars ought to be invested in transportation and education that's available to everybody.
What about tax incentives as a way of keeping a company that's considering leaving to stay here?
The only thing I have to say, you have to have an honest discussion about what the impact of that is in 2 ways. In impact, we got a $4.6 billion operating deficit that hasn't come up yet in this conversation, and you're going to give it an entity another tax break. Well, where is the money going to come from to offset that? And I'm also very concerned, given the history of the last 10 years, that when you give one entity a tax break, the next company's coming in, where's mine? And I've heard it in the 10 years I've been here, over the last 8 to 10 years. The other thing, just quickly, I know this time is so precious. God, it fleets away. The HOV lane, with all due respect to Bob, my point about tolling the HOV lanes is as a pilot. And obviously, those of you come in carpools, we'll make sure we find a way that you're not penalized for that. The idea, if we don't have a serious discussion about funding our transportation infrastructure, when we've stolen the gasoline tax out of the Special Transportation Fund for 15 years, we've got real problems on our hands. And if we're not willing to have a serious discussion about how we're going to fund it, some of these problems are going to come back to bite us, not just in the economic world, but there could be serious safety issues involved. So to me, this notion about just poo-pooing because it's a cost, when a toll is assessed against everybody who drives through Connecticut, not just Connecticut residents, to me is a big deal.
We got a pilot over here. We got out-of-state tractor trailers
And you have
here.
no solutions, Bob.
Trust me, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, yeah, and trust me.
Gentlemen, please, I want to go to Mr. Lamont, who raised his hand.
Through tolls all day long.
Thank you for a second.
Thank you
Mr.
for
Lamont,
that.
go ahead.
Let me just mention to Bob that when GE moved to the state of Connecticut, we had one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the country. It is down from where it was back then. So for him to say everything is related to the corporate income tax is wrong. For him to say we're going to eliminate the income tax and turn it back to the way it was before 1990, back when we had one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the world. Taxes are important, but so is transportation, so is education, so is getting it right. And by the way, the incredible disrespect I just heard about a company called Infosys. It's an amazing company. They are training hundreds of people right. Can I just finish if you don't mind?
Residents by the day.
If you could just let me finish, I'd appreciate it. They are training hundreds of people right here, get up to 1,000 people, Connecticut people for Connecticut jobs, making sure that this state has the folks with the IT skills they need to continue to attract good-paying businesses to the state. So to disrespect, one of the leaders of Infosys is right here, right now. So to hear what could be the next governor of the state, diss them and diss what they mean to the state is not a way to open up the welcome mat to new companies.
I've had calls and emails from 3 to 5 people over the last few weeks, people that are training people who have come in from overseas. They're training them for 3 to 4 weeks. Then they get an exit package. They leave, and the person from overseas takes their job. Unfortunately, it's a fact, Ned.
Mr. Lamont, just very quickly to Keith's follow-up question. Yep. Would you extend tax incentives to companies like GE to try to keep them here? Charlie Baker, that he mentioned before, Massachusetts put a big tax incentive on the table for GE to take. Would you do the same sort of thing to keep companies here?
We don't lead with that, and that's our problem as a state. We're sort of leading with the incentives, leading with the giveaways. That's no way to keep and attract good businesses here. When we were competing with Rhode Island for Infosys, you know what Rhode Island said? Rhode Island said, we'll match any incentive that Connecticut puts on the table. Now let me tell you why you ought to be in Rhode Island. That's how we compete. Have the best trade workforce in the world. Have our fiscal house in order, and make sure we have a transportation system that works.
We're going to have time maybe for our panelists to ask another quick question in a moment. I want to get to something with Oz Griebel quickly. Oz, I'm sure that you and the rest of Connecticut read this report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last week. Right. It basically says that climate change is becoming a bigger problem even faster than we thought. Right. Yale has studied this, and when they look at how people feel about climate change, about 60% of people in Connecticut think that the governor of the state should do something about it. What do you think the governor of the state should do about climate change?
Well, I think there's certainly issues around the shoreline. We're working with our property and casualty companies, with UConn at Avery Point. I mean, don't quote me because I'm sure I've got this number somewhat wrong, but we've got rising sea levels right along our shoreline. And we've had the last 2 major storms. Is the policy to rebuild there? I think that needs to be a serious discussion. On a more positive way, the great thing about this state is we've got tremendous intellectual capital in areas dealing with renewable energy and on issues that dealing with the rising sea levels. To me, there's an opportunity here not only to leverage that research, whether it's at UConn, whether it's at Yale, whether it's at the Fuel Cell Corporation out in Danbury, take advantage of this extraordinary intellectual capital we have so we get the proverbial tool. We deal with some of the issues here in the state of Connecticut, and we provide a leadership role. What I've said is that when I talk about restoring Connecticut to national preeminence, that's what I'm talking about. Connecticut, all 49 other states want to look at Connecticut. The rest of the world wants to look at Connecticut because we've established the standard that everybody wants, and that includes dealing with the issues of renewable energy and climate change.
Mr. Stefanowski?
Yeah, it's a problem. To Oz's point, people on the shoreline may feel it first. We need to do something about it. We need to incentivize the private sector to come in and develop new technologies. I've met with 2 companies this morning that are focused on green energy. They're not asking for government subsidies. They're asking for a level playing field. What does our governor do? He uses a big government approach. He creates a green energy fund. He taxes all people. He puts it into a green energy fund. He raises $10 million. What does he do with it when the general fund has a deficit? He raids it. We absolutely have to focus on climate change. It is a much broader issue than Connecticut. It's a federal issue. It's an international issue. But with respect to Connecticut, we need to encourage green energy. We need to let the private sector compete and solve the solution, not another big government excuse like Ned and Oz will propose.
Mr. Lamont.
Donald Trump is dismissive of climate change. Bob Stefanowski says, I don't know enough about the science. And yes, a governor can make an extraordinary difference in drawing a line in the sand. We're a small state. We're congested. We have coal dust flying in from other parts of the country, depositing here, what that means in terms of asthma and such. Look, the Trump car efficiency bill was extraordinary. The automobile industry supported it. It was good, long-term goals, and they were building to that. And instead, President Trump said, no, we're going to end those efficiency standards, and no, Connecticut and California and other states cannot have higher standards. You want a governor who's going to fight for Connecticut values and Connecticut standards. So the degree to which it's the environment, the degree to which it's right to choose, the degree to which it's guns, you want a governor who's going to stand up and protect our values here in the state of Connecticut.
I'm going to ask for quick questions and quick answers, and I'll start with Jen Bernstein. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. One of your first jobs as governor will be to deliver a budget to the legislature in February. We have a multi-billion-dollar projected deficit for 2019. Will you be able to do it without gimmicks or one-time fixes like the rainy day fund? How will you do that?
Mr. Stefanowski, you've got the first answer here.
Well, you know why we have the rainy day fund to begin with is because of fundamental tax reform at the national level. It just shows you what a little common sense around lowering taxes rather than raising them like the two other people on our panel want to do. So thank goodness we have it. We need to cut cost. When I was at UBS, we did a thing called zero-based budgeting. I had every single department come in, and I'll do the same thing my first week in office. I will declare a state of fiscal emergency. I'll have every one of these departments come in, and the discussion will be, your budget's zero. How about that for an idea? I don't care what you had last year. I don't care how many open positions there are. We're starting at zero, and we're only going to add back in what we absolutely have to have. I did it at UBS. I took 10% of the cost base out in the first year. That's $1 billion. We have to address the state employee pension plan. There are a ton of very hardworking state employees that have religiously contributed to that plan for decades. We have to try to preserve their retirement. But on the other hand, I am not doing the state employees any benefit. I'm not doing the state of Connecticut any benefit by ignoring that we have a $100 billion problem like Mr. Lamont wants to do. Those checks are going to start to bounce. We need to have security for existing retirees. Maybe we also offer a defined contribution plan, but we need to attack that. The third thing, Jen, is we need to reprioritize. Look at what Governor Malloy did with the bonding a few weeks ago. He bought a property in Orange, Connecticut for $5 million that was worth $500,000. How does that happen? A business person doesn't do that. How does he have the authority to do it? That's what's driving the taxpayers of Connecticut crazy. They don't mind having tax money taken if it's used for good purposes, but they hear this story, so we'll reprioritize. We have a bus, and I go on for hours. We have a bus from Britain to Hartford that costs $600 million for a 9-mile bus route, $1,000 an inch. You know how I'm going to get rid of that budget deficit? We're going to start to run the state of Connecticut like a business with budgeting, accountability, and responsibility over your money.
Mr. Lamont?
Well, let's get back to your question, Jen. Are we going to be able to solve this without resorting to a lot of one-shot deals and gimmicks? And both Bob and Oz have talked about using the rainy day fund. That's the exact wrong thing to do. They're talking about deferring contributions to the pension fund. That's the exact wrong thing to do. That's just what Jody Rell, that's just what John Rowland, that's just what other governors done for years, and that's one of the many reasons we're in this incredible mess we are right now. First thing you do, and you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Bob Stefanowski, another $11, $12 billion cut. He says, I'll pay for it with zero-based budgeting. You have to have a budget ready to go in about 110 days, Bob. And right now, your zero-based budgeting is zero. It's a blank piece of paper. That, you want to know what makes the business community nervous, is knowing that we could have just more of this fiscal ineptitude and fiscal turbulence, the same type of thing that's cost this state for so many years. I'm going to be the one person that gets there and deals with the structural deficit head on. I'm going to deal with the health care and do what I can to bring down the cost there, especially when it comes to pharma. I'm going to work collaboratively with labor and look at the pension fund, find a way to stretch that out and do something on the asset side so you know what our obligations look like and we take care of that in a serious way. I'm going to deal with shared services and tough love with our mayors, but make sure you know that we can no longer afford to subsidize inefficiency any longer. Talk about education. We're one of the few states that pays for more teachers outside the classroom than teachers in the classroom. I'm going to do everything I can to give you confidence that I'm going to bring down the high cost of government without raising the income tax, without raising sales taxes, and get it done in that first year. To put it off with rainy day funds and deferring contributions to the pension fund is more of the same that got us into this mess.
Just a quick question? You want a quick answer, right?
Well, you got 4 minutes left to talk.
That's to the end. So it's the gorilla in the room, right?
Right.
The notion of the $40.4 billion operating deficit, $4.6 billion operating deficit on a $40.4 billion budget. Remember, on July 1st at 12:01 a.m., about 40% of that budget is already allocated to debt service, pension funding, and state retiree health care. So you're not talking about balancing $4.6 billion on $40 billion. You're talking about balancing on about $27 or $28 billion. If you're not going to use the rainy day fund, then what are you going to do? You can't lay state employees off. Are you going to cut municipal aid more? Are you going to cut aid to agencies that are serving the most vulnerable around us? There are no choices in here that are easy. These are very difficult, serious issues. It's not child's play about cutting taxes or saying we're not going to use the rainy day fund. If you're not going to use the rainy day fund in a deluge, when are you going to use it? That's what it's there for. We've got to look at this budget over the next 3 or 4 budget cycles. And what I mean by that, and in this first one, do as little harm as possible. That's why I would use the rainy day fund. That's why I would look at deferring certain contributions that don't have to be made in this biennium to give us some breathing room so we don't have to attack municipal aid, we don't have to underfund agencies that are serving the most vulnerable around us. That's a key element of what we're trying to get done.
And Mr. Stefanowski, please go next, and we're going to be shortening the amount of time because we're running low on time. Please go ahead.
You listen to both of these guys. It's more taxes. It's high-level ideas about what we're going to cost. You know how we're going to get out of this budget deficit is growth. If the state of Connecticut had grown at the same amount as the national economy over the last 6 years, we'd have $12 billion more of tax revenues. We wouldn't have a deficit. And you know why we're growing significantly less than the national economy? Because of fundamentally flawed tax policy. We need to reduce the state income tax. We need to reduce the corporate tax. We need to fight tolls tooth and nail, and we need to get this economy moving. You cannot cut your way to prosperity. No one's ever been able to do it. We got to get this economy growing. My plan gets the economy growing. These two guys, it's 4 more years of Dan Malloy.
Bob's plan will stop our economic growth dead in its tracks. It will put us through every 2 years of fiscal hell. We're not going to have a balanced budget as far as the eye can see. And yeah, Jen, we will be papering things over and playing games. That's no way to get this economy going. The Fiscal Stability Commission started out with the words fiscal stability and economic growth. First thing I got to do is reduce the cost of government, hold the line on taxes, and get us to an honestly balanced budget. Then we can start about cutting taxes from there.
When you talk about reducing the cost of government, can I just ask you, be specific about what you're going to reduce in the cost of government day one, month one?
Day one, I sit down and we find real reforms on health care. That's 25% of the budget, John, 25% of the budget. And as I look at that, I look at both Medicaid and I look at the state employee plan. There are significant savings there. I already mentioned the fact that Massachusetts and other states have brought down the cost of pharma dramatically by going out to bid. We should team with Rhode Island. We should team with Massachusetts and go out and use our purchasing power to bring down those costs. There's one very specific idea that could save us hundreds of millions of dollars.
What are you going to do sort of cut the cost of government?
I got to tell you, 5 minutes ago, we need to fill every open judicial spot we have, whether we need it or not. Now it's I'm going to cut costs. I don't know what side of the table you're on, Ned. It's very, very hard to follow.
How are you going to cut costs in the state of Connecticut?
We will have every department come in. We will exercise zero-based budgeting. We have a $40 billion biannual budget. Does anybody in the audience or anybody at home think I can't find 5 to 10% of waste, fraud, and abuse in the state of Connecticut government?
Give us a couple of examples.
That's $4 billion that we can use to fund a tax cut, we can use to get this economy moving, and we can bring jobs back to Connecticut. We cannot cut cost our way out of this. We have to grow the economy. We've been living with more cost for 8 years. I'm the one who's going to change it. These guys are the same.
Jen, quickly.
Going to use the rainy day fund? Is that the plan?
We'll have to look at it, Jen. We will have to look at it. I'd hate like heck to do it. We'll see how much cost we can take out. But again, thank goodness there was some rational tax policy at a national level that generated $1.5 billion that you wouldn't have today if you had listened to these guys.
But didn't a lot of people file their taxes earlier because they were worried about what was going to happen with the taxes?
You know why? Because the state income tax is so high and the deduction's going away that they wanted to preload it. The answer to that is not charitable contributions like you're about to hear right now. The answer to that is get rid of this state income tax like every other rational state in the country is reducing.
I just want to let you gentlemen know your clocks are going to be stopping at 2 minutes. Ned Lamont, go ahead. I
was just going to say that rational tax policy you're mentioning in Washington, D.C. is costing the state of Connecticut over $1 billion with the non-deductibility of state and local taxes. That rational tax policy you're hearing in Washington, D.C. is resulting in trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. Bob, you ought to remember this. We cannot deficit spend. We have to have a balanced budget. So I know your friend Donald Trump says we can borrow until we're blue in the face. We don't do that in Connecticut, and I'm not going to allow it to happen.
Ned, you ought to remember this. Your buddy Dan Malloy has put the highest tax rate in the state of Connecticut over the last 8 years. Our tax independence day is May 3rd. We work from January 1st to May 3rd just to pay our state and local income taxes. It's 2 years longer than any other state in the nation, and it's exactly the economic policy that you want to continue.
And Oz Griebel, did you want to add to this?
Sure, why not? I can't help myself. You cannot run the state of Connecticut like a business. With all due respect, business principles can be applied, household principles can be applied. But you can't outsource an agency to India. You can't eliminate unprofitable customers. That's not what governors do. Government has to fill the void that private sector can't fill. The private sector is a great ally in identifying ideas as to how to get that done. But the idea that you can run government like a business is preposterous. That's not what government is for. It's there to create the environment for job growth, for certain. But it's there to invest in transportation. It's there to invest in education. It's there to help take care of the most vulnerable around us. So this notion that you're going to cut, the thing we all have to remember, I don't know where you're going to cut in the first 2 years when there's no layoff provision through 2021. Go ahead. I'm all done. I'm zeroed out.
You are zeroed out, and I think that we are going to closing statements. Am I right about this? My goodness, we've got 2 minutes before closing statements, and I'm looking right at you, Keisha Grant. A quick question for quick answers.
Gentlemen, as the number of people leaving Connecticut continues to grow, so has the need for the state to bring in more young people into our cities to live and work. What role does government have in supporting our cities for that type of growth?
Mr. Griebel, go ahead.
Two things. First of all, jobs are at the top of the list. What we've said, Monty and I have said, is every decision we make is going to be whether that decision enhances Connecticut's ability to add 200,000 net new private sector jobs over the next 10 years. Growth is the future. We've had no net job growth in 30 years. So jobs are key to attracting and retaining people of all age levels. In terms of the cities, you've got some, I think, to Stanford. We're never going to have a Boston or a San Francisco. We don't have the density for that. We've got some very good small-sized cities in this, including a place like Middletown. Are you all done?
One more point, go ahead.
That's stop right there for you.
You'll stop right there, Ned Lamont. Thank you very much, Mr. Griebel. Mr. Lamont, go ahead.
Yeah, Keisha, that's why I'm the candidate up here is talking about reducing the property tax. Right now, our cities have the highest property taxes, in the state, and so do many of our small towns. If you want to bring our cities back to life with arts and culture and jobs, we got to do everything we can to keep young people there. There are jobs. There are tens of thousands of jobs we got to fill right now. And the first thing I would do in our smaller towns as well, let's get 5G. Let's get Wi-Fi. Bob, we don't need to do this as taxpayers. We'll get Frontier and the other cable guys to do it. That's the world I come from. That would keep young people here in this state.
Mr. Stefanowski, go ahead.
His number one priority is Wi-Fi. I mean, you really can't make it up. He wants to put a statewide auto tax in. You know who I was endorsed by this week? The Connecticut Association of Realtors, 17,000 people. You think if they liked his property tax plan better than mine, they'd be endorsing me? The realtors are the canary in the coal mine. They see the trends first. They want housing prices to go up. They had a debate 3 weeks ago. They interviewed all three of us. They looked at our tax plans. Who did they pick? The guy who's going to lower taxes and get this economy moving and get the most important asset that most of the people watching the show right now, home values, to start to appreciate. That's what we're going to do.
And now we're on to closing statements. And Mr. Stefanowski, we will stay with you.
Let me take a deep breath.
Take your time.
So, elections are about contrast. You just heard it from Oz. He thinks we should continue to run Connecticut like a government and not have any state fiscal discipline like you use in a business. You've got contrasts and backgrounds. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I was born in New Haven. I went to the public schools. I've run small, medium, and large-size organizations. The state of Connecticut is a $40 billion biannual budget that's broken and needs to be turned around. Ned Lamont ran a small cable company where he laid off 60% of the people and paid himself a $500,000 bonus. That's not the leadership we need. We don't need tolls. We don't need higher taxes. We need somebody who's going to put the taxpayers first, who's going to reduce regulation, and is going to drive this economy so we can invest in health care and education and all the things that we need to do. But it's not putting up tolls. It's not yet another tax. It's fundamental change. I'm going to bring that change. These two guys are more of the same.
Mr. Griebel.
So first of all, thank you for the opportunity. I want to make sure you all know that we're rising in the polls. So join the team, jump on the bandwagon because it's starting to get crowded. Vote on November 6th to take Connecticut back from a two-party system that has resulted in 30 years of no net job growth, higher taxes, more taxes, out-migration, and still with taxes, underinvestment in education and transportation. Take Connecticut back from that failed two-party system and elect Monty Frank and me, who will provide the leadership that is focused on Connecticut taxpayers, Connecticut residents, and Connecticut employers, not who's in charge in the Senate or the House, not whether it says R or D on your sweatshirt. The fact that we provide independent leadership to bring both parties together and to bring the private sector in to promote this state and to address our serious fiscal challenges. So on November 6th, go to the bottom line, line 1H, vote the bottom line first before you vote for the other offices. Vote for Oz Griebel and Monty Frank.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lamont.
And after you take a look at the bottom line, come back up to the top line, because you want to have a governor who's going to make the fundamental changes you need to make sure that we solve this structural deficit once and for all and get this economy moving again. And just borrowing from the rainy day fund and deferring pensions is just more of the same. And Bob's just going to make it worse. If you cut $11 billion out of this budget, $1.4 billion for the 400 richest families, you know who's going to pay? You're going to pay. Our cities are going to pay. Our schools are going to pay. The middle class is going to get slammed, and that's no way to get this state going. I would be the first governor in decades, generations, who started a business, created jobs, and knows how to work with the business community. It's about that, and it's also about what type of a state you want to be. It's about our Connecticut values. It's about the environment. It's about respecting women. It's about our reproductive rights. It's about guns and making sure that on the 6th anniversary of Sandy Hook, we don't roll back and go with somebody who got a AAA from the NRA.
I'd like to thank all of our candidates, and I would like to thank the Connecticut reporters who joined us on stage to ask questions at Infinity Hall in Hartford. Also thanks to the Connecticut Broadcasters Association for hosting this debate. No matter what line you look at, please vote on November 6th. It's very important. I'm John Dankosky. Thank you so much for joining us.
Here we go. One to go.
Here we go.
At 3-Day Blinds, we provide a design consultant to come to your house for free to help you choose the perfect draperies, blinds, or shutters for your style and budget.
I'm able to help clients create spaces that maybe they've never dreamed of.
We're helping people find function in their space.